exercise free will without knowledge? Right? I mean, how can you make a choice without the knowledge of what choice to make? And so if the government strips the knowledge away, they take the choices away. Now you don't have the option of choosing where to go. It's one thing to try to control people's behavior within the context of their ability to exercise free will. It's another thing to literally control them before they can exercise judgment.
One of the CIA men told the people they were now sworn to secrecy that this meeting never happened and this event never happened. I said, well, you're going to tell the public about it. And he says, no, we don't tell the public about this. It would panic the public.
I think it's time to open the books. Questions that have remained in the dark, question of government investigations of UFOs.
Stop the music, Governor. Did you say the United States government is covering up a history of a UFO sighting in your state?
It is now time to put away this embargo of truth about the alien presence.
They don't produce documents, Chris. They should just get it all out.
We ought to do it because the American people, quite frankly, can handle the truth. And we ought to do it because it's the law.
It's no longer about lights in the sky. It's about lies on the ground.
As a retired nuclear physicist who has been studying the evidence about UFOs since 1958, and since 1967 has given well over 700 lectures in all 50 states, 10 Canadian provinces, and 18 other countries, I've reached 4 major conclusions. 1, the evidence is overwhelming that Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft. In other words, some, underline 10 times, some UFOs are alien spacecraft. Most are not. Don't care about them. 2, there is no doubt that a small number of people within governments, both in the United States and overseas, have been actively covering up the truth about these visits. There really is a cosmic Watergate. 3, there are no good arguments against these conclusions, only people who haven't studied the relevant evidence. And 4, flying saucer visitations and the cosmic Watergate represent the biggest story of the millennium. And I should say that I prefer the term flying saucer because all flying saucers are UFOs. Very few UFOs are flying saucers. All great-grandfathers are men. Not all men are great-grandfathers. I'm interested in the flying saucers, not the UFOs. The basis for these conclusions: A, there are at least 5 large-scale scientific studies which provide substantial evidence. These include Project Blue Book Special Report Number 14, the largest study ever done for the United States Air Force, covering more than 3,200 cases, with more than 200 charts, tables, graphs, and maps. It is quality evaluation, cross-comparison between unknowns and knowns. The official press release lied about the data. I'll document that in a minute. It is almost never referenced by UFO debunkers. Dr. Carl Sagan, we were classmates at the University of Chicago, claimed there are interesting UFO sightings that are not reliable, and reliable UFO sightings that are not interesting. But there are no cases that are both reliable and interesting. This statement was not backed up by reference to data, but is directly contradicted by the Blue Book Special Report 14 data. It was found that the more reliable the case, the more likely to be unexplainable. United States Air Force Secretary Donald Quarles, in a very widely distributed press release when the 1955 study was completed, flat out lied. It's a strong statement, and I'm sorry to make it, but it's true. He stated, quote, "We believe that no objects such as those popularly described as flying saucers have overflown the United States. Even the unknown 3% could have been identified as conventional phenomena or illusions if more complete observational data had been available." The fact of the matter in the report that he was talking about is that the unknowns comprise 21.5% of the cases, completely separate from the 9.3% listed as insufficient information. The 3% number was a lie. Furthermore, a statistical comparison of the unknowns and knowns showed that the probability that the unknowns were just misknowns was less than 1%. It must further be noted that the press release did not give the title of the report or the company that did the work, Battelle Memorial Institute. If they'd given the title, surely some newsman would have said, hey, what happened to reports 1 through 13? They'd never heard about them. The correct answer, had it been given, would have been that they were all classified. It's a very valuable source of information, this report. It's funny how the debunkers never talk about it. Another primary source of valuable data, which should be of interest to you all, are the congressional hearings of July 29th, 1968, which included testimony from 12 scientists. The most important paper was by Dr. James E. McDonald, professor of physics at the University of Arizona. He had talked to 500 witnesses, but he presented 41 outstanding cases, including multiple witness radar visual sightings, sightings by pilots, by astronomers, by meteorologists. He noted physical trace cases, of which, by now, more than 5,000 have been collected by Ted Phillips from 95 countries. They get dull. Same thing was happening all over the world. Saucers seen on the ground. It leaves. They find physical changes. Happens here. It happens there. It happens everywhere. 1/6 of those cases involved reports of small beings associated with the craft while it was on the ground. I was the youngest contributor to those, and I think the only survivor since then, to those hearings in 1968. And I was the only one without a PhD. That might tell you something. I'm not sure what. The proceedings, incidentally, are still available online. One of the contributors was Dr. J. Allen Hynek, chairman of the astronomy department at Northwestern University, and for 20 years, United States Air Force scientific consultant to Project Blue Book. His book, The UFO Experience, A Scientific Inquiry, should be required reading by anybody who's going to talk about flying saucers, especially negatively. According to another source here, according to a special UFO subcommittee of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, world's largest group of space scientists, 30% of the 117 cases studied by the University of Colorado, government-sponsored study in the late 60s, and discussed in the Condon report, Edward U. Condon, could not be identified. And yet the headline said scientific study shows no UFOs. Totally untrue. There's a 2-volume report called the UFO Evidence, which has loads of data, hundreds of cases that couldn't be identified. There's also the Cometa report from France, which goes into numerous excellent officially involved cases in France. There are a dozen PhD theses about UFOs. One of them demonstrating how poor the press coverage has been. I haven't seen one about coverage by the scientific community or coverage by the political community. That's another story. Anybody need a PhD thesis topic? There's 2 good ones. Also, a third one, the will not to believe on the part of scientists. It's a sickness, a disease, if you will, infecting people who think they know all there is to know and don't. A really bad example of bias and ignorance appeared in Astronomy magazine this month, May 2013, by Dr. Phil Plait. He does a blog, The Bad Astronomy. The title of the article, believe it or not, is The Science Behind UFOs. It's a cover story. He somehow manages to mention none of the 5 large-scale scientific studies that I've just talked about, or any of the 5,000 physical trace cases, or any multiple witness radar visual cases, or abductions, nor advanced technology studies at national labs and in industry showing trips to nearby stars in reasonable round-trip times using fusion propulsion are feasible. I worked on fusion back in the early 60s. And to give you a form of reference, every star in the universe, or multiverse, produces its energy by nuclear fusion. That's what H-bombs are all about. And a good demonstration of the atom and the UFO together, if you will, is that in a very short period, we managed to go from a 10-ton blockbuster, World War II, 1945, took a big B-29 carrier. That was in 1944. In 1945, the first A-bomb, 15,000 tons of TNT, not 10. 7 years later, which is nothing, cost a lot of money, we set off the first fusion device, an H-bomb, called Mike, incidentally. It released the energy of 10 million tons of TNT. So you go from 10 to 15,000 to 10 million tons. And the Russians sent off one that was 50 million tons of TNT. The point is, we know how to get to the stars if we want to spend the money. I'm not saying it's the ultimate technology. I'm saying scientific progress comes from doing things differently in an unpredictable way. The future is not an extrapolation of the past. You have to change how you do things. And, you know, what gets to me, having worked on fusion propulsion, fission propulsion, nuclear reactors for space applications, and all the rest of this, is that we tend to forget that if you make enough stupid assumptions, you can prove almost anything is impossible. One quick example, one astronomer in 1941, he was fed up with all the science fiction stuff about going to the moon. That was nonsense, he said. So he published a scientific, in quotes, paper, calculating the required initial launch weight of a rocket able to get a man to the moon and back. Legitimate question. How big is it got to be? Pages of equations. He concluded it have to weigh 1 million tons. He was off by a factor of 300 million. Proving if you make enough stupid assumptions, you can prove anything is impossible. So we have reason to be very careful when somebody says something is impossible. I have a whole book of It's Impossible, Isn't It? Was going to be the title, but Science Was Wrong is what the publisher decided on. I like the first one better, but anyway. Let's look at another progression, not only in bombs. Ferdinand Magellan's ship, he didn't make it, but his ship did, went around the planet in 3 years, in 1523. 3 years. 3 years before the mast, you might say. Science fiction writers had going around the world in 80 days in the 19th century. The space station goes around the world in 90 minutes. Progress comes from doing things differently. A second problem I found, I worked under security for 14 years for major companies like GE, GM, Westinghouse, McDonnell Douglas, TRW Systems, Aerojet General Nucleonics. I set a record for working on canceled government-sponsored research and development programs. Not intentionally, you understand. Another one of the false myths is that governments can't keep secrets. 2 astronomers have demonstrated this. Dr. Seth Shostak of the SETI Institute, you know, S-E-T-I, that stands for Silly Effort to Investigate, incidentally. That's another story, which I've written about in the book. Said you can prove that the government can't keep secrets by how badly FEMA fouled up with Katrina and how poorly the post office is operated. Now, if you can see a connection between either of those things and governments keeping secrets, I sure can't. He didn't mention the CIA, the DIA, the NRO, the NSA, and all those other alphabet soup agencies. Another great astronomer, Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, head of Hayden Planetarium, he said the proof that governments can't keep secrets is shown by how much we know about President Clinton's genitalia. Now, if you can figure that one out, you're better than I am. Now, the proof, and I'll show some of this in my lecture Tuesday night, about government cover-up. It's not just an idle concept. If you wish, you can get a hold of 156 top secret Umbra NSA UFO documents. They're not very interesting because all you can read is one sentence per page. Everything else is whited out, not blacked out. They said that was too impressive on television when I used that. They told me this. And the reason is everything else is sources and methods. 98% sources and methods, and 2% UFOs, but it's filed under UFOs. Come on, that makes no sense. You can get a bunch of CIA, and I'll show some of these too, blacked out UFO documents. So highly redacted that you can read about 6 words per page. And my favorite thing, and it took me 3 years to get this, was one of the CIA UFO documents that says on the top, deny in toto. They couldn't find 6 lousy words to declassify. Something's wrong here. And I have to tell you, 1 minute, okay, I won't tell you. Maybe I'll tell you that Tuesday night. One more thing. Air Force General Carol Bolender stated that UFO reports which could affect national security, he was asked to look about what we should do about Project Blue Book, are not part of the Blue Book system. UFO reports which could affect national security are not part of the Blue Book system. Incredible statement. I located him, I talked to him on the phone, he verified there are 2 separate reporting channels. He never heard that from the Air Force. His job was to decide what to do about Project Blue Book, and it was canceled because of this memo. But the public never heard that he said, reports which could affect national security are not part of the Blue Book system. People are surprised. Just one more sentence here, 2 sentences. I've won several debates on UFOs. I've only had 11 hecklers and over 700 lectures. It's past time for the press, scientific, and political communities to do their homework. And I should add, at least 3 UFO crashes have occurred. You'll hear more about those later in these hearings. Thank you very much.
Tell you that part of your job is to ridicule English citizens or any UK citizen who had maybe filed a report or a sighting that was legitimate?
Nobody told me to do that directly, sir, but there was certainly a sort of unofficial policy that in responding to media inquiries, the press office would deliberately slip in terms such as little green men and flying saucers to disparage and downplay the subject.
And they haven't told you what to say as a private citizen, have they?
No, sir, but when I've written books, which I have in the past, I've had to submit those for official security clearance.
Divers in the water. The water was very clear. You could see down as much as 200 feet in it. But what I saw down there were 2 UFOs parked side by side, but I couldn't see anyone around either one of them. Then a little later, someone moved, one of the UFO occupants, and I guess go ahead and call him what they are, the alien, moved over to the side and came into my line of sight. Very soon after that, he came out of the water going approximately 100 miles an hour. As soon as he broke the surface of the water, he increased his speed to approximately 2,500 miles an hour and quickly went out of sight. He was gone for about 15 or 20 minutes. He came right back, when it slowed down very much, went in the water again at about 100 miles an hour, went on down and he and the other one, you could see them working on the UFOs. They, after about approximately 2 hours of performing maintenance on the UFOs. The two of them took off together again. We went and left the water at about 100 miles an hour, immediately accelerated to well over 2,500 miles an hour, went virtually straight up and disappeared.
Now, when Operation Saucer took place, and it happened because the populations of the affected area couldn't live anymore because they were seeing UFOs all the time, and worse than that, they were being attacked. Over 1,000 people were attacked during a certain period of time. There were lots of injuries made by this object that would come from the sky and emit a beam of light towards people's body, making them faint and become anemic. Now, the situation went so intense that the community leaders went to the governor of the state of Pará to ask that something is done about it. And the government asked the Brazilian Air Force to start an investigation to give answers to the population, to the society. Then it was established the Operation Saucer to investigate and to engage the extraterrestrial intelligence, because there was already, and this is in the documents, there was already a knowledge that there was an intelligence beyond that phenomena, and that phenomena was not earthly.
Because UFOs are a definite matter of national security, those national security decision makers have made it certain that the subject remains out of sight as much as possible. Is this not obvious by now? Now, why would they do this? Well, many reasons. Let's touch on the matter of oil. Because even a child can understand that these objects don't need oil to go from point A to point B. Whatever powers flying saucers, it's something different, something better. So if the president were to announce the reality of these things, how long do you think it would take before scientists openly begin to study the nature of the propulsion and power system of UFOs? This would immediately challenge oil, not simply as the world's leading source of power, but it would severely threaten the entire global financial system, which is based upon oil. And probably 90% of the value of any product you can think of is determined by the energy that went into making and transporting it, and in most cases that means oil. To say nothing of the millions of jobs that rely on the petroleum industry. We're talking one big overhaul of everything that matters in the global economy. Can we think for an instant that those individuals in the know haven't thought about this? Especially if there is a holy grail involved, some form of free energy. What if this new form of energy can't be easily monetized? What if? Could the global financial structure afford free energy? A perverse question, to be sure, but one that has to be important to those individuals at the top of the human power structure. And of course, there is the political nightmare. Any announcement of this reality would come at the cost of worldwide public anger. No one wants to learn that they've been lied to for an entire human lifetime. They would want to know just how this secret was kept. That's a very big key right there. In fact, there are a number of well-researched UFO crash events. So suppose for a moment that it happened. That would mean that the cover-up involves much more than mere knowledge of other beings here on planet Earth. It would mean there is possession of such advanced technology as to be nearly incomprehensible, at least at first. Hard to consider, and yet an inevitable conclusion. So what happens when teams of brilliant scientists with total secrecy and nearly limitless black budget funds are able to study recovered alien technology for many years and even decades? Could it not be that, given enough time and effort, even if they couldn't replicate what they found, they might have learned a few things? Some such claims have been made, and it's reasonable to suppose that breakthroughs would have been made. Breakthroughs such as solid-state electronics, fiber optics, high-tensile fibers, lasers, and an array of other money-making opportunities for the defense and other industries. None of this has been proven, but it is also true that the private research undertaken in classified environments is not easy, for outside researchers to observe. And in fact, it would be very easy to hide a Roswell connection in the historical treatment of these and other technologies. Another relevant consideration of such breakthroughs is that they would reduce to zero any incentive to reveal the secret to the public. Why give up the goose that lays golden eggs? But now matters become even more interesting. Because what if some of the breakthroughs were even more significant? What if they included secrets to what's known as field propulsion or electrogravitics? What if they led to a new source of energy, something that could replace petroleum? How far ahead might some of that classified world be? Those of us on the outside trying to peek in can only make educated guesses or investigate occasional leaks. My own conclusion, at least for now, is that they are very far ahead indeed, with the ability even to enter and leave Earth orbit with much greater ease than people suspect, perhaps a clandestine space fleet, most likely a significant built infrastructure, a large portion of which is deep underground, and even, why not, possible encounters with non-human intelligences. Why would that be so impossible? To what extent would such a group even answer to the President of the United States? Do they rather answer to private international financial powers, which basically is how the whole world already operates?
It is called the Virginia case, in which an alien spacecraft crashed and at least 2 creatures were captured and offered no resistance to its capture. But they died right after they were captured. And this procedure were taken of rescuing the debris of the UFO and capturing the creatures were taken both by the fire department of the city of Virginia with the army personnel of nearby headquarters. And in the next day, the following day after the capture, we already knew that U.S. intelligence and U.S. military, and as well as U.S. doctors were sent by the U.S. consulate in São Paulo to the city of Virginia to follow the procedures. The doctors were sent, medical doctors from the United States, to follow what was being done about the creatures, because they died and nobody could explain how were their morphology, how they function. And we know for a fact, because this is a very well documented case that has been investigated by at least 70 UFO researchers, including UFO researchers from the United States, as Dr. Roger Lear, Dr. James Herta, and the deceased Dr. John Mack from Harvard University. They've been to Brazil, they confirmed what the UFO researchers from Brazil discovered. And we know for a fact that at least one of those 2 creatures were taken to the United States by U.S. military. And it was taken in one of the Buffalo airplanes that serve the U.S. embassies and consulates in South America. When it came back to the United States, it brought back to here one of the creatures and part of the object that crashed, that were rescued, that were retrieved by the Brazilian military.
People are intimidated by this. There's stigma attached to these subjects, and so sometimes they don't want to come forward and discuss this topic. How do we try to convince people it's better to be on the side of truth than it is to be attached to stigma and embarrassment?
I think that if you understand what's behind the secrecy, and that there's an entirely new area of science and technology that could fix the global warming problem, alleviate the poverty problems of the world, the geopolitical problems. These are very practical concerns, and that's what I've been focusing on a great deal here. Or what's behind how these UFOs move? Well, there is a physics behind it. And in the secrecy that's been built up around this subject, if we can break that down and bring this technology out, we can create an entirely new civilization here and solve some of our worst and most intractable problems. I think if people study it objectively with an open mind and they realize that's what's at stake, it's the future of the planet and our civilization, then they'll have the courage to step out, even if there is the social opprobrium and ridicule that goes with this subject.
One day, after I reported to a couple of VPs on how we were doing, one of them asked me personally if I was doing anything interesting outside my shop. And I said, well, you're not going to believe this, but I've read about 50 books on UFOs. And the amazing conclusion I've come to is that they are very real extraterrestrial craft. And the only thing that's uncertain is to whether we find out how they work before or after our competitor Lockheed. After a moment of silence, one of them said, how much would it cost to take a look at that question? Therefore, we started a little project, kept quite low-key, to study the question of how they worked. Everyone who worked on this project knew that when the project was over, each would go back to his other job or be laid off. This was when we needed to find someone to study the sightings and reports in detail to see if we could get clues as to how they worked. And we hired Stan Friedman. We should have a picture of Stan Friedman up there right now as he looked in 1968. We did a lot of interesting projects, such as measure the effects of a huge magnetic field on the speed of light. There was none. Interview an abductee. Try to invent a physics that would permit travel faster than the speed of light. Developed an instrumented van to observe craft sightings anywhere, anytime, and spun magnets in space to try to change their weight. They didn't change. I also became friends with James E. McDonald, a physicist who was making a lot of noise and giving lectures about the details of highly credible sightings. Then the military orbiting program was canceled in 1969. Dozens of people were being laid off. We were not making fantastic progress in our project. And I was assigned in 1970 to learn everything I could about radar and ballistic missile defense. We canceled the UFO project and moved on.
Let's go to our esteemed Honorable Paul Hellyer of Canada. We would give you 20 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. And thank you, Steve, for the invitation. My name, as I said, was Paul Hellyer. I'm a former Minister of National Defence for Canada. I served in 3 governments during a total of 23.5 years as a Member of Parliament. Although as Minister of National Defence, I had sighting reports of UFOs. I was too busy to be concerned about them at the time because I was trying to unify the Army, Navy, and Air Force into a single Canadian Defence Force. And that itself was a kind of battle to the finish. So this was not high on my agenda. But about 10 years ago, I started getting interested due to a young man from Ottawa sending me material on the subject. I told him I was too busy to read it, but he had confidence that someday I would. He sent me a copy of Colonel Corso's book, The Day After Roswell. It took me a while to get around to reading it, but I took it for my summer reading in 2005 and was really impressed with what was contained in it. And what I thought to myself is there are huge issues here, huge issues. And the American people and the people of the world have a right to know what's going on because they're part of it. It's not just an isolated thing. And so after confirming the contents of the book with a retired United States Air Force general, I accepted the invitation of Victor Vigiani, who's over here somewhere, and his cohort, Mike Bird, to speak to a symposium at the University of Toronto. And I said, UFOs are as real as the airplanes flying overhead. That gave me the dubious distinction of being the first person of cabinet rank in the G8 group of countries to say so unequivocally. Since then, I've learned a lot from many sources, including a number of the fantastic witnesses that we have heard these last 4 days. They were so outstanding, I was just really blown away with them, the amount of information that was available. And I appreciate every single one of them. But because I'm not a ufologist, I'm a politician, there are are only a few things that I want to add in that particular realm. First is that about in the 1960s sometime, there was a flotilla of UFOs headed south that crossed into NATO territory in Europe. And the Commander-in-Chief of the Supreme Allied Headquarters in Europe was naturally very shaken. Fortunately, or maybe divine providence, before the panic button was pushed, the flotilla turned around and headed back north. Obviously, they had thought maybe they were Russian, and they were very concerned about it. Anyway, an investigation was launched into this whole subject, and a document was prepared which concluded that at least 4 species had been visiting Earth for thousands of years. And this is my own view at this stage as well. So, except for that, there are just a couple of things that we've talked about that I'd like to refer to. And one was that we were referring to them as they until this morning when Linda Moulton Howe, I think she was the first one, actually named 3 different species. I have brought my latest book called Light at the End of the Tunnel, A Survival Plan for the Human Species, as an aide-memoire, and I name 5 different species here. I'm aware of more now. As a matter of fact, I saw a document just a few days ago that mentioned 20. And I think you, Mr. Chairman, were interested in some of the places they might come from. And I have in here Zeta Reticuli, R-E-T-I-C-U-L-I, Reticuli, the Pleiades, Orion, Andromeda, and the Altair star systems. So I don't think we can any more refer to them as they, because they're not an amorphous mass. They are different species and consequently may have different agendas. I don't think we can say that they all have the same agenda any more than we could say that the United States, China, and Russia had the same agenda. Our real interests may be very similar, but as of now, our perceived interests are still quite far apart. One more observation before I begin what I want to say, and that is that we spent quite a bit of time talking about the 66-year-old cadavers. And I was glad to have Linda this morning finally say that there are live ETs on Earth at this present time, and at least 2 of them probably working with the United States government. The other species that I learned about not too long ago was called the tall whites. And this is when Paula Harris broke the story just a few years ago. And through her good offices, I had the chance to talk for about 3 hours with former Airman Charles Hall and listen to this absolutely fascinating story of how he was working with, first of all, he was scared out of his skin, but after that, when he got to know them, how he was working with, and finally they became to trust each other and have a good working relationship with the tall whites at the gunnery range at Indian Springs in Nevada. And these tall whites were living on United States Air Force property and working in cooperation with the United States Air Force and sharing technology with them. He wrote a book, incidentally, called Millennial Hospitality. There are 4 different versions, but Paula says that Millennial Hospitality number 2 is the best. I think that's the one I read, and it's a very interesting read if you want to sort of get inside the problem of what it's like to bump into these people floating across the terrain in the desert. Well, enough on that for now. My interest is in full disclosure. And my only caveat is I think probably I would say 95 to 98% full disclosure. I know of one or two things that I'm not sure should be in the public domain, at least yet. They will be someday, I'm sure, but not maybe immediately. But just as children survive the idea of the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus when they become adult, I think that tax-paying citizens are quite capable of accepting the new and broader reality that we live in a cosmos teeming with life of various sorts. The fact that some other civilizations are more advanced than we are may be humbling, but that could be a necessary step in our survival. The world is an unholy mess. We have at best until the end of this decade. In my book, I said we have 10 years to stop global warming if we don't want it to be beyond the point of no return. 2 years has gone past since it was written, so I say we have until the end of the decade to arrest global warming. Yet our leaders don't even talk about it very much except in a superficial way. They appear to be more interested in starting wars to control more oil and, in effect, prolong the gravity of the threat. Of course, even if they took the problem seriously, they wouldn't have the finances to finance the transition from oil to the clean economy, to clean energy, because we have an infinitely silly banking and financial system in the Western world. And the United States Congress, I regret to say, is partly responsible, and I'd be glad to elaborate on that later if you're interested. And finally, they need the technology for clean energy. And it exists, and it's being kept secret by the same vested interests who control our destiny. Who are these vested interests, and what are they up to? Well, Senator, you were talking about a military junta. In my opinion, that is true, but I have broadened and deepened the definition to cabal, and the cabal comprises members of the Three Sisters: the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderbergers, and the Trilateral Commission, the International Banking Cartel, the Oil Cartel, members of various intelligence organizations, and select members of the military junta, who together have become a shadow government of not only the United States, but of much of the Western world. The Council on Foreign Relations is the oldest of the Three Sisters, and as early as October 1940, years before Germany surrendered to the Allied armies and to vaporize Hitler's vision of empire, the Council's Economic and Financial Group drafted a memorandum outlining a comprehensive policy, quote, to set forth the political, military, territorial, and economic requirements of the United States in its political potential leadership of the non-German world, including the United Kingdom itself, as well as the Western Hemisphere and the Far East. The Council made absolutely no effort to disguise, where's that? Right next page, yeah. The Council made no effort to disguise the fact that the purpose of the Grand Area and later world hegemony was to support an expanding U.S. economy, to provide it with raw materials and markets for its products. This was labeled the national interest, quote unquote. It was equally clear that the national interest was the interest of the ruling elite, whose members comprised the Council. The real interests of the majority of rank-and-file Americans was never a factor in the equation. So, Mr. David Rockefeller, who was a member of all three of the sisters, is quoted as saying this at a meeting of the Bilderbergers in Europe. "We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years. But the world is more sophisticated and prepared to march toward a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries." He, of course, pretended he didn't say that, but the witness this is reported by Daniel Estulin, a thoroughly reliable reporter who has written the true story of the Bilderberger Group. And if you want to really get inside of what's been going on there for this long time, that's a good place to go. So anyway, you hear what Mr. Rockefeller said, and so there you have it. The aim of the game is a world government comprising members of the cabal who are elected by no one and accountable to no one. And according to Mr. Rockefeller, the plan is well advanced. Does this help you to understand why our civil rights are being taken away from us? I say us, because Canada too is included in the grand plan. A giant leap in the wrong direction followed the end of the Cold War. No one could have been happier than I was when the Berlin Wall came down on November the 9th, 1989. The elation on our side of the curtain was near universal and very significant on the other side as one country after another regained its freedom. Nearly everyone believed that it was the dawn of a new era of peace and prosperity for people everywhere. There was much talk of a peace dividend. The prospects were dazzling in their scope and diversity. It was a unique and God-given opportunity for a new, braver, and fairer world. We blew it. We blew the chance of a lifetime to do good things. A small group of zealots undermined our golden opportunity to pursue peace, not war, and little did we dream that they had a vastly different vision of the new world order. Their plan, which is now commonly known as the Project for a New American Century, included preventive wars in clear violation of international law, regime change wherever and whenever the U.S. desires, and if they can get away with it without excessive casualties, and the establishment of a kind of economic and cultural hegemony with America acting as constabulary, quote unquote. That was their word, globally. This was to be accomplished without authority of the United Nations and without the restraint of existing international treaties. It would involve a military buildup unprecedented in peacetime history and could trigger an arms race, which is precisely the opposite of the peace dividend that the world had rightly looked forward to. The Machiavellian scheme involved secret police, the curtailment of civil liberties in defiance of the U.S. Constitution, and a moribund economy operating way below its potential. Exactly those features for which the Soviet Union was held in contempt. The initial draft of the document was so controversial when it was leaked to the New York Times that it had to be rewritten, but it was not changed very much, just the cosmetics, enough to make it politically acceptable. So I have a few minutes here to my bearings. The document said this. Well, it may have been easy to persuade President Bush to abandon his stated policy of not getting America more deeply involved in international affairs, but persuading the American people would be more difficult. Sophisticated Americans would question such a giant sea change in policy. The authors of Rebuilding America's Defenses, Strategy, Forces, and Resources for a New Century recognized this difficulty from the outset because their document contained the following sentence. Further, I'm quoting, further, the process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary changes, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor. Well, it wasn't too long before they got their catastrophic and catalyzing event. Terrorists struck the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon in Washington on September the 11th, 2011. And incidentally, they have removed the sentence about Pearl Harbor in the document that you can now get if you went to the internet to find it. Almost the whole world mourned. Canada mourned. The overwhelming majority of Muslims condemned the treacherous attacks. My sympathy for the friends and families of the injured and dead was genuine and unwavering to this day. My sympathy for the U.S. government began to grow a bit thin, however, when I heard President Bush cite the reasons for the attack. And I quote, "Why do they hate us?" he asked rhetorically in an address to the Congress. They hate what they see right here in this chamber, democratically elected government. Their leaders are self-appointed. They hate our freedoms, our freedom of religion, our freedom of speech, our freedom to vote and assemble and disagree with each other. I felt sad when I heard the President's word. I assumed that he believed what he was saying. But if that were true, he was profoundly ignorant of the real thoughts and feelings of people in other parts of the world. If he wanted to hear the truth, he should have listened to Osama bin Laden, who was well informed concerning the origins of the kind of fanatical hatred of the United States which has led to such treachery. This is his version of events. Every Muslim must rise to defend his religion. The wind of faith is blowing, and the wind of change is blowing to remove evil from the peninsula of Muhammad. Peace be upon him. As to America, I say to you and its people a few words. I swear to God that America will not live in peace before peace reigns in Palestine and before all the army of infidels depart the land of Muhammad. Peace be upon him. That is clear enough. The dislike of America has nothing to do with democracy versus dictatorship or wealth or freedom of religion or freedom of assembly. It is directly related to American foot-dragging and stick-handling a just settlement of the Palestinian question.
Mr. Hellyer, I'd hate to interrupt. Time has expired, but I'm very happy if the panel has no objection to allow another minute or two to finish your statement. How much time do you think you need to finish it?
I think probably somewhere between 1 and 5 minutes, most.
I think we'll give you 2 minutes to finish your statement, as much as I'd like to grant more. Thank you.
Okay. In short, American foreign policy was the root of the conflict. So here we are more than a decade later fighting another war that can't be won. There is no country on earth powerful enough to protect its citizens against fanatical hate, as we learned from the Boston Marathon. And the mere attempt to pursue the impossible pits neighbor against neighbor and the state power structure against everyone. All of the freedoms won by the millions of men and women who fought and died in World War II are being flushed unceremoniously down the drain. The only hope of peace is a negotiated settlement. This will require a paradigm shift in American attitudes. It involves a de facto renunciation of the plan for a new American energy and the adoption of a pledge of cooperation with all humankind to build the kind of world which we are collectively capable of. Young people everywhere need to be challenged by a noble cause. They need to be involved in arresting global warming, creating a banking system that is just and sustainable, and lead the way in the transformation to the new reality that we have to live in harmony with our celestial neighbors, as well as seeking peace on earth. In a word, we have to become spiritual beings and practice the one tenet that the world's major religions have in common, and that is the Golden Rule. In this field, too, and I just want to read one paragraph at this time, if you'll allow me, Mr. Chair.
Well, we will allow that, but there's only about 30 seconds, so I hope you can conclude it with that statement.
Fast.
Thank you.
This is from the late Dr. John Mack, an American secular Jewish psychiatrist who became a world leader in interviewing abductees, or experiencers, as he called them, came to this conclusion in a startling book, Passport to the Cosmos. Quote, although the aliens are not themselves gods, their behavior is sometimes anything but godlike. Abductees consistently report that the beings seem closer to the Godhead than we are, acting as messengers, guardian spirits, or angels, intermediaries between us and the divine source. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yes, well, as we get older and older, I'm 77 right now. You can't live forever, you know. So if this procedure I'm going to have to clean the blood doesn't work, then I've got probably a few more months to make it before my kidneys shut down, you know. So that's kind of why I'm kind of going along with the interview at this time.
You're seeing that what you went through is just too important for people not to know about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you just, can we start at the beginning with your military career and just walk through what exactly your experiences were?
Was drafted into the military and got into the U.S. Army. After that, I was sent to the Signal Training Center in eastern United States.
What year would this be?
58. I went through the Signal Training course. And at that time, I went through the radio teletype course and also the cryptography course, crypto. They had 5 instructors that were getting out of military service. So they pulled the top 5 students, and I was 3rd in the class. So I got pulled as an instructor.
Now, were you at this time also working yet for CIA?
No.
Not yet?
No. After one day, my boss came to me, and he said, how would you like to, make some extra money? And I said, oh, money is good. So he's explained to me that he could put it through, would have to get a top secret White House Q clearance for the job, And I thought, boy, must be a pretty exclusive thing, And I said, well, what is this? And he said that I'm director for the CIA for eastern United States, And I said, oh, I didn't know that. And he said, you weren't supposed to. after about 6 weeks, my security clearance came through, and I got my CIA card. It was an ID card, like a credit card, where I could just go up to the door and slice it, walk right in. And my name at that time, I used a artificial name too. Never used my real name. I started working with him on the project he was on, and that was Project Blue Book, which was kind of partially a fraud.
You're saying some of the Blue Book cases were,
Yes.
were completely fictitious?
Yes. But the cases that we got came from, I think it was Fort Belvoir, Maryland.
Fort Belvoir?
Yeah. And it didn't come from the Pentagon, or it didn't come from CIA headquarters. But we would get reports about a certain sighting that they had in Mexico or Italy or something like that. And then we had people that would follow through on it, that would go out and interview the people to see if they were nutcases or if it was real, you know.
So they'd be going overseas frequently?
I wasn't, but I always stayed statewide. But the people we had working with us from the CIA would do that. We would get like a new report probably a couple times a week. I was coming into the Army fresh off the farm, you know, so I really didn't have much knowledge of anything, but my boss filled me in on Project Blue Book and what they had found so far, as far as grays and aliens and the Roswell incident.
How did you feel when this first got dumped on you? When you first learned about this?
I was just kind of overwhelmed with all of this, you know. And I said to him, I don't know if I'm going to be able to be a judge of this type of thing. What's real, what's not, when I don't have much knowledge of it, you know. So...
What did he say?
He said, well, we have to build the information as we go, and you'll see how this thing is working out.
And then the other thing is, of course, you really weren't able to tell family or close friends, obviously.
No, I couldn't tell anybody. In fact, I had to take a vow that I wouldn't tell anybody. A lot of it for 40 years, and more of it for 50 years, which is up in 2010.
You're doing all this crypto work, you're looking at images, photographs, video. It's 1958, maybe the fall of 58. What happened after this?
At that time, the Project Blue Book thing kind of went pot, you know. If you remember, back in those days, they kind of declared it as a nothing, you know.
Right.
And
they were telling the world all UFOs are misidentifications, hoaxes,
balloons,
psychological issues, whatever.
Yes.
Yeah.
So my boss came to me and he says, we've both got a new assignment. And he says, oh, I said, where are we going? Oh, he says, we're going to the Capitol. We're going to be part of the Eisenhower push. He's trying to find out something about, all about these aliens that MJ-12 was supposed to find out, but never sent back reports to him.
The MJ-12, the UFO control group, were they calling it MJ-12 at that time? Yes.
They called us in, went into the Oval Office, and President Eisenhower was there and Nixon, and they said, we called the people in from MJ-12 from Area 51 and S4, but they told us that the government had no jurisdiction over what they were doing. So being a general, past general, you didn't tell him to go to hell without any real good reason, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, I want you and your boss to fly out there. I want you to give him a personal message. He says, I want you to tell them, whoever is in charge, tell them that to get in, they have this week, coming week, to get into Washington and to report to me. And if they don't, I'm going to get the 1st Army from Colorado, and we're going to go over, I'm going to take the base over. I don't care what kind of classified material you got. We're going to rip this thing apart.
Eisenhower was going to invade
Yes,
Area 51.
Yeah, with the 1st Army.
So you go out with your superior.
Yes.
You fly out. You land. What happens? Can you describe this whole process, what you saw?
It took us the 13 or 15 miles south to S4 and like different garage door openings.
Okay.
And in these garage door openings, they had like different saucer crafts. The very first one had the Roswell craft in. It was kind of crashed up, but apparently every alien that was in it died except for a couple.
So you see the Roswell craft, and what are some of the others that you see?
Well, the Roswell craft was really strange because it looked like real heavy aluminum foil. We could rock next to it, and you could rock it. The whole thing probably weighed 150, 300 pounds.
Could they tell what the source of power was of this craft?
Yeah, it was like a reverse gravitational thing of some kind. In fact, one later on, I got the mathematical code for reversing gravity in a 3x5 card. I guess there are different types of grays and so on.
How did you see that evidence?
Well, at the later on at S4, we viewed the autopsy film, and then the colonel said, what we've got in here is we're interviewing a gray alien.
All right, right there. How did you feel at that moment?
Well, I thought, boy, we had no idea we were going to see the real thing. All we saw was film.
You had to have a little bit of heart racing at that moment.
My boss was able to go in and had like a partial interview with him.
So what did this gray alien look like? Could you describe him a little bit?
This one looked a little bit oriental.
So I'm just wondering if it looked almost human, what about this didn't look human?
No, it didn't look human as far as the skin tone and basically the shape of it and the size.
How was its head size compared with a normal human, for example?
Brain was kind of a little bit bigger. And some of the nose was very, very small. And the ears were just like holes. Mouth was very small.
Now, why were they bringing you out here at all, anyway, to see an alien? What was the point?
To go back and tell the president they actually had one.
So he did not know at this point if there was an alien at S4?
No.
What did you do then at Area? Were you done, or did you have other things to do with
Yeah,
S4?
so basically we were kind of done. Went back to Area 51. They took us into the main building, and there we saw a U-2, which of course we didn't know existed. And a model of the SR-71.
Yeah, the Blackbird.
So, but like I mentioned earlier, it was not a model of the current Blackbird, later
an earlier
Blackbird,
version.
but an early version.
Did you go directly to Washington after this?
Yes.
Or did you go somewhere else? How did they get, did you fly regular airline? Or?
We flew back to the commuter plane back to the air base, and then took President Eisenhower's Lockheed Electra back to Washington.
You and your supervisor,
Yeah.
superior officer, and now you're meeting with the president?
Yes.
Can you describe this?
Well, we met with him in, the second story of the old OSS warehouse building. And Eisenhower and Nixon were there, and also Hoover was there. So he asked us what was going on, and we told him about the alien, the whole situation, and the black projects and so on. And he was just totally shocked. He appeared for the first time to be worried. You know, like he was worried.
I would think that Eisenhower would, I mean, he certainly knew that flying saucers were real.
Yes.
He knew that there were aliens. So I guess I'm just wondering, what would he have been, really surprised about?
Surprised about the black programs. Eisenhower said, got to keep this thing completely secret. You know, can't talk about this.
Your actual name is, the name you grew up with, that was a different name than what you had in the...
I never used it in the CIA at all.
Now, what about today? You're going on the public record, and this is still sensitive information, even though earlier you talked about, security oaths that maybe expire after a certain period of time.
50 years.
But you're still concerned.
Linda Moultonow's phone call, her phone was tapped, and they got my phone number, and through the telephone company, they're able to find me, and so on.
When they found you, what happened?
I was going to a grocery store. Two guys in black suits come out of a black Lincoln town car and came over to see me. And they told me that I'd better not publish anything or talk to Linda about any more things. So at that time, I did, I stopped.
That was enough to intimidate you.
Yes. Rather remain anonymous. Never show my face on anything.
Really, thank you for doing this.
Yes. This was, I guess, kind of a good idea because I feel much better having talked about it. I kind of feel like there's a load off my shoulders.
Really?
Because I had an awful lot of secrets that I had kept over the years.
Tell me about how you felt going into these hearings and how you're feeling coming out.
I came in knowing that in my heart of hearts that certainly we aren't the only intelligence in the universe, the human beings. And what I came in wanting to learn more about was the transparency in our government, and this is the perfect subject to prove how disclosure in some instances are impossible and how threatened people feel when they have information that our government doesn't want out, and I find that appalling. I am just as convinced about that, and I want to do I want our Congress to do something about it. And it's almost impossible to be a skeptic after these amazing witnesses of caliber and intelligence and experience to be a skeptic about whether or not there are alien beings in the other worlds around us. But I'm not a scientist. I can't say for sure, but I can say absolutely our government has to get out of this flat earth society stance and start working on what's going on in the universe.
How did you feel about this whole program going into the testimony, and how do you feel coming out of it after having listened to the
Yes. Well, I entered this as a open-minded skeptic, and I'm impressed more with the quality of the witnesses than I ever expected. So this is moving me to think that a lot of further investigation with more resources need to be done, including what I think is some push to the United States government to put more resources into this. I am convinced of these sightings, the truthfulness. I have no doubt about what these people are testifying. I'm not saying everything they're saying is true, but much of what they're saying as far as the objects are saying are true. And we have clearly unexplained objects out there that our government recognizes. Where I'm not sure we've totally met the burden of proof is whether those have extraterrestrial origins. Now, there's been some there'll be some more testimony, and I understand from one of the witnesses that's going to be appearing that he can maybe make me a little more convinced on that score. I'm not saying it can't happen by any means, but I guess my opinion is more like the British ministry's position, that I think it could be an explanation, and I'd like to know if it's a highly probable explanation, not just a low probability explanation of this phenomenon. So that's where I am in this, and I'm very, very impressed with the people that put this together to get this number of witnesses and people together in one place, so that we can find out exactly what the current standing of this very interesting area is.
I'd like to know how you felt about going into these hearings, and how do you feel coming out?
First of all, I want to commend the Citizens Hearing on Disclosure for inviting me to come a couple months ago. I didn't know anything about the subject other than fringe things. I did get an opportunity to look at the 1968 report and got it, analysts of it and analyzing it and all the things that have happened, viewed the tapes, the videos. Nothing has been, and that's perfect preparation. The absolute best thing of all of the hearing for me is the testimony, the intelligent testimony from all the witnesses, almost all the witnesses. The military particularly, because I'm a member of the Defense Committee, and I know when they come forward speaking, they speak from truth and from their heart. So well, I don't say convert because I never was converted anyway, but I'm certainly going to support the issue, the Citizens Disclosure, Hearing on Disclosure, Steve Bassett, and the crew. It's a universal issue. If there's going to be a universe in the next 5, 10, maybe next week, but certainly we've got a little time, I believe, we've got to work with the universe. We heard from 12 different countries, scientifically proven, and I am a convert to the issue of E.T. and extraterrestrial.
Okay, I'd just like to know how you felt about the hearings before going into them, and how you feel about the hearings coming out of them.
Well, I accepted the invitation to be a part of this panel because I carry a constitution, and the First Amendment says that the citizens have a right to petition the government for redress of grievances. They have a grievance. There's not been a hearing on UFOs for a very long time. They want a hearing. I think they deserve a hearing, so if this would help to get a hearing, I wanted to be a part of that. Now, what's happened during this time? Gee, you know, the cloak of secrecy has become more and more obvious to me, and asking myself, these are honest, good people that made the decisions to pull this cloak of secrecy over this. Why did they do that? I think we need to understand why they did it so that we can get the thing reversed. You know, there's something out there. There's clearly something out there. You know, and the American people have a right to know.
Tell us how you felt going into the testimony and how you feel coming out 5 days later.
When I decided I would do this, I honestly knew very little about the whole topic. I mean, I remember Roswell, I remember the cornfields and how they were around, and I remember some of those things, but I really didn't even know how much of a topic it is, how many people were doing research in this area, and the experiences they had. So I came to learn and listen, which I have done.
And how do you feel coming out? Do you feel...
After listening, I will tell you, the people that have testified, I think, have great credibility. I think they have been fabulous. And I have learned so much. And I have, again, I think we're sort of naive to think in this huge, huge universe that there are not other people or other planets that are highly functioning people that live on those planets. And so I have gotten a great lesson this week.
Tell me how you felt going into this and how you felt coming out of this.
Well, coming into the hearing, I was very grateful that the Steve Bassett and his staff sent me several books and DVDs so that I could prepare to some degree and have a base of knowledge that I didn't have before I was invited to this event. And so I was leaning towards acceptance of the extraterrestrial. And I have no problem understanding, as a result of my life experience, the conspiracy that exists within the government to maintain secrecy and the propensity or the generic acceptance of secrecy within the military. Coming out of it, there's no doubt in my mind that there's an extraterrestrial presence that's affecting the planet, and I think it's so important. Probably the most important issue facing our civilization is to try to understand this, to explore it, and hopefully mature to a level where we can have contact with extraterrestrial interest, and also at the same time realize with some degree of humility that I don't think we have the scientific wherewithal at this point in time to understand how all of this is happening from an extraterrestrial presence.
Just tell me how the committee members felt coming into this project and how you think they feel going out.
Certainly the former members of Congress that we approached had some trepidation. This had never been done before. Just the concept of a citizen hearing like this with former members of Congress had not been done before. And then, of course, the subject matter was extraterrestrial phenomena. So I fully expected them to have concerns. And they were provided material in advance, some books, certain videos that were very representative, I think, of some of the best information that's out there. They were provided some advanced oral statements from the witnesses, not all. And I think that certainly helped a little bit. They got a little bit more comfortable. They were not selected on the basis of their personal views on this at all. I didn't know what they were. I didn't ask. They were selected because they served in Congress. They'd been on committees. They possibly been on some committees that seemed appropriate. And they were available, willing to do it. As it happened, we got some extraordinary people. That's great. It's been 5 days, and certainly it has been transformative for them. There's no question. They received more information in this 5 days than most members of Congress have ever gotten. And it has impacted them. I think that they are
trying to decide what to do. Do they want to involve themselves further? And there's a lot of ways they could do that. Do they want to speak publicly? What have you. That is, of course, up to them. The role that they are playing in this citizen hearing essentially ends on Friday the 5th. If any, Friday the 3rd at 5 p.m. If they choose to go forward, well, obviously something will be coming out in the near future, and we'll see where that goes. But their impressions have been universally, I think, positive about the event. They are very impressed with the quality of the witnesses, and clearly now have a much more, I think, comprehensive view of this issue that they weren't able to get when they were in Congress, because with the government denying that anything is valid here, clearly it's difficult for someone to then get into Congress to present that information. Any person in Congress to say, well, if the president and the military are saying there's nothing to this, I can't afford to spend time with that person. So this is kind of an end run around that barrier in a way, and we'll see how it goes.
The last time that Congress held a hearing addressing the extraterrestrial issue was 1968, 44 years of sightings ago. In those 4.5 decades, hundreds of thousands of new sightings have taken place. Government agency witnesses have come forward. Media coverage has expanded. Hundreds of documentaries have been produced, thousands of books have been written, and yet the United States Congress has remained silent. The motto of the citizen hearing is, if Congress won't do its job, the people will.